Community Experience. Part 2. America Rise. Jimmy Morris. Less stress matters. Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Mahmoud El-Kati, this episode is being dedicated to information related to voting. What voting means, how voting works, how the numbers add up, or when the numbers don't add up. We're going to be looking at a number of different incidents and a number of different historical moments in time that lead us to the present day voting. Hello, welcome back to Less Stress Matters. Dr. Mahmoud El-Kati, lecturer, commentator, author, civil rights worker, Black history historian. The Age of Enlightenment. These are interesting times. Black language and culture, new challenges and dilemmas.
And that's precisely what happened. It's the same summer in which 54 churches in Mississippi alone were bombed. Sometime in the fire. Which black people were killed matter-of-factly, disappearing. But when two whites with one black were killed and buried, that caused the attention of the government through Lyndon Johnson to search for these three civil rights workers, human rights workers. That's one thing to call attention, but the other thing was greater than, we don't want to measure things like that, but it really changed Mississippi, was the organization of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, which was an integrated party. That was something miraculous. That in this party, called the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, there were 5 or 6 or 7 whites, I still consider it a miracle, who joined black people and went to the National Convention in 1964. It was called the Mississippi Challenge. The challenge to what? The Liberal Democratic Party.
The Louisiana Voter Literacy Test, circa 1964. The state of Louisiana literacy test. This test is given to anyone who cannot prove a 5th grade education. Do what you are told to do in each statement. Nothing more, nothing less. Be careful, as one wrong answer denotes failure of the test. You have 10 minutes to complete. Number 1, draw a line around the number or letter of this sentence. Number 2, draw a line under the last word in this line. Number 3, cross out the longest word in this line. Number 4, draw a line around the shortest word in this line. Number 5, circle the first letter of the alphabet in this line. Number 6, in the space below, draw 3 circles, one inside, engulfed by the other. Number 7, above the letter X, make a small cross. Number 8, draw a line through the letter below that comes earliest in the alphabet. Number 9, draw a line through the 2 letters below that comes last in the alphabet. Number 10, in the first circle below, write the last letter of the first word beginning with L. Number 11, cross out the number necessary when making number below 1 million. Number 12, draw a line from circle 2 to circle 5 that will pass below circle 2 and above circle 4. Number 13, in the line below, cross out each number that is more than 20 but less than 30.
The student voice was a 4-page little 8 by 10 sheet 4 pages fastened together that we printed in our own office. Demonstration would be held at a restaurant or some public facility that was closed to black people. We'd march in an orderly fashion, occupy those seats.
Waiting to be served.
Every state agency could be utilized to enforce segregation.
You know, Johnson, Humphrey, Mondale, those guys, the liberals, the guys who believed in democracy, who respected human personality. And these people, the integrated black group, went there to displace the white supremacy group, which represented Mississippi, and the delegation from Mississippi was all white, from a state at that time was between 35 and 40% black. There was no black representation from Mississippi. There were no congressmen or anything like that. It was all white, and America and the American government tolerated that, and these people challenged them. What happened was simply this. I can't get into all of it, but the Mississippi challenge changed American electoral politics from what it was to what it is today. And what they did was they forced the hypocrisy before the eyes of the world to be seen. When the liberals, you know who they are, and I'll just cite 3 of them: President Johnson, Hubert Humphrey, and Mondale were kind of the visible leaders of this. Instead of giving the seats to the integrated group, which represented the 14th Amendment says that the people who sit in Congress should represent all the people from a given state, whatever the population is made up of. They didn't do that. They offered a compromise. Here's politics of saying that they would give black people 2 seats in the delegation from Mississippi. And they're very articulate, in my words, in the classic black English. The response from Fannie Lou Hamer was, "I didn't come here all the way here for no 2 seats."
And it wasn't too long before 3 white men came to my cell. One of these men was a state highway patrol. He said, "We're going to make you wish you was dead."
I didn't come here all the way here for no 2 seats. We're the representatives of Mississippi because we represent all the people. We're both black and white. The ones that's sitting in the seats now that the Democratic Party acknowledge are all white, and not just white, they were white supremacists. They then made another compromise offered a compromise to the Mississippi delegation that they would give them a token seat in the Michigan delegation. Fannie Lou Hamer, we're not from Michigan, we're from Mississippi. That's called the art of politics. It's about compromising, and some compromises are necessary and fruitful. Some are disgraceful, and this is an example of a disgraceful compromise. They refused, and what they got make the long story short, from the Liberal Democratic Party was to change the rules, to open the party up to more black people, to more women, to more Mexicans. That's before the emergence of the term Hispanic, which put on the minds of Spanish-speaking people this concept of Hispanic. People didn't call themselves Hispanic until which is kind of equating with race. Hispanic is a linguistic designation. The people who speak Hispanic are black and white and Native American, just like the population here is made up of those 3 geographic populations. You can call them black or Negro and Indians and white people, but they are geographic populations, and the same geographic population that exists all over this hemisphere, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, and so forth, and they in America. The long story short is that by 1968, the Democratic Party had been reformed to become more inclusive. You saw more black people, more women, more Native people, more what we used to call Mexicans. They're now Hispanics, including, the Spanish-speaking family. And to make the Democratic Party look the way it looks today. That was done by some people from Mississippi, headed by a man named Lawrence Goyette. The most celebrated person of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is Fannie Lou Hamer. We know who she was. I didn't come all the way here for no 2 seats. Confronted America. Is this America? Is this America? I wish we had more time to elaborate on this, but what I wanted to get from what I said is that American electoral politics was transformed because some black people, supported by white people from Mississippi, changed the operation of the Democratic Party to be more inclusive and not have just token Negroes here and there and so forth. Not have just an occasional Mexican here and there and women here and there, but to be inclusive. That reformed the Democratic Party to what it is today. And in 1968, those reforms took place. And in 1972, in order to keep up appearances, the Republican Party opened its doors to more people, so-called minorities and women and so forth. That's how it happened, through earnest struggle. And that's the way change occurs. Governments never institute reforms. They never begin reforms. Movements make reforms.
On May 2nd, 1967, 24 men and 6 women marched into the California State Capitol building in Sacramento. They were carrying pistols, shotguns, and rifles. But this was not a SWAT team or a security force, at least not a government one. In fact, this heavily armed group was more of a well-regulated militia. And they'd come to the Capitol that day to try to stop the legislature and the state's Republican governor from passing a law that would strip them of their ability to openly carry their weapons as they patrolled the streets of their neighborhoods.
The government responds to movement. That's how you bring about social change. You must have a movement. If we are to deal with this question of mass incarceration of our black young men, we need a movement. The young lady is right, who wrote the book on mass incarceration. We need a movement to make the government respond.
In an effort to keep people safe.
They put trumped-up charges of conspiracy and felonies on everyone who went in to exercise a constitutional right and said they had no right to bear arms in a public place. The California Penal Code Section 12020 through 12027 and also the Second Amendment of the Constitution guarantees the citizen a right to bear arms on public property.
Now, it may come as a surprise to some of you, given today's discourse on guns, that the National Rifle Association and the Republican governor of California, Ronald Reagan, came out passionately in an effort to strip this militia's right to carry arms. Why was Ronald Reagan so up in arms? After all, California was an open carry state. These Americans were exercising their God-given Second Amendment rights. So what was the problem?
Am I under arrest? Take your hands off me if I'm not under arrest.
That militia that marched into the Capitol that day was the Black Panther Party. And the street patrols that they were engaged in were operations to protect their communities from the police and other government forces that had been targeting, abusing, and killing black people.
The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense calls upon the American people in general and the black people in particular to take full note of the racist California legislature, which is now considering legislation aimed at keeping the black people disarmed.
That's how you bring about social change. I want to fast forward to another question, which I think is relevant and important to us. And that is, I want to salute a recently a person who has gone, in the words of Frederick Douglass, gone to that silent continent of eternity. Her name is Unita Blackwell. She was 86 years old. She was one of the founders of the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and she said she wished the young people, generation or so later, could really understand the undercurrent of what they are standing on right now. And that was people like her who went to jail 70 times. More than Martin Luther King, more than Stokely Carmichael, more than even John Lewis. Unita Blackwell, go to your computer, look her up. One of the champions of the civil rights movement, who recently passed, who didn't know what voting was until she was almost an adult. Wasn't even related to that kind of question. She was awakened by the Student Nonviolent.
The Student Voice was a 4-page, little 8 by 10 sheet, 4 pages fastened together, that we printed in our own offices in Atlanta and distributed in the cities and towns, mostly small rural towns where we're working.
I was already a member because the local group became part of SNCC. We studied the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence.
Demonstration would be held at a restaurant or some public facility that was closed to black people. We'd march in an orderly fashion, occupy those seats.
Waiting to be served. And someone would come up and spit on you or put a lighted cigarette out in your hand.
Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. These are young people, you know. Most of the people in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee were 25 or under. Occasionally somebody would be more than 25. And in fact, the oldest person in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was Fannie Lou Hamer. She didn't join the NAACP, she didn't join the Urban League, she didn't join the Congress of Racial Equality, she didn't join the SCLC. She joined the youngest civil rights group because my spirit matches theirs. Although I'm 44 years old, I'm old enough to be the parent of most of those. I identify with the spirit. You understand that? About age stuff? That ain't the deal. I'm more like young people inside of me. So I belong with them, said Fannie Lou Hamer. And that's who she operated out of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Never set foot on a college campus. That's what movements do, and it changed her mind. It's the esprit de corps. It's the unison with people who are like you, who feel like you, and who think like you. So, and to some extent, age is just a number. To some extent, that's true. And she's a classic example of that. She became a great champion. Helped change American electoral politics. There's another kind of politics, okay? Electoral politics, you talk about Democrats, Republicans, voting and that kind of stuff. Well, real politics is outside of that. You know, politics come from movement. Politics can be disruptive too, like people who don't believe in government, just raise some hell. But there are movement politics which have focused on general questions that needs to be addressed. And the civil rights movement and the movements that sprang from the civil rights movement, yes, they did. The training, that was the incubator for the women's rights movement, for youth, for all of these other movements that you take. There's more movements now than you can count. Everybody's got a movement. There's a movement, I think, in the nursery school now, I think. I think so, yeah. But the birth of the modern champion for democracy is what we are pleased to call the civil rights movement. Some of us call it the liberation movement. Some may even call it the Black Power movement.
California lawmakers were terrified. Some reportedly hid under their desks. The entire establishment, including the gun lobby, denounced these armed black people. And the bill, which became known as the Panther Bill, was aimed at taking away what the NRA and the Republicans portrayed as their sacred rights as Americans. In fact, the Panthers in the Capitol that day were charged with felonies.
FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover today asserted that the Black Panthers represent the greatest internal threat to the nation. Hoover said the Panthers have perpetrated numerous assaults on police and have engaged in violent confrontations throughout the country.
The so-called Panther Bill made one thing abundantly clear. Having armed black revolutionaries patrolling their neighborhoods with weapons was a greater threat than losing the right to openly carry weapons for everyone in California. In fact, this bill resulted in some of the strictest gun control laws anywhere in the United States, all because some black Americans exercised their right to carry loaded weapons. Now, around that same time, major media outlets were aghast as Malcolm X called on black people to arm themselves and to defend themselves against racist violence.
However, but that's the genesis of what we use as proliferation of a movement for every unrepresented groups, for every marginalized group. It comes from one source. It's from the black community, the African descendants of slaves. That's the juxtaposition. What's the opposite of freedom? The extreme opposite is slavery. And this is that plane that we operate in. Slavery, which represents freedom. White supremacy represents oppression. That's what the whole question and the fight is about. That's the common denominator. No matter what you're talking about, affirmative action, or all of these different issues that surface here and there, they are symptoms like, a cold or something when you really have pneumonia. And the thing you want to do is carve out pneumonia, cut out pneumonia. And that's white supremacy. The country can never, ever be free until this happens. So that I've said not enough about anything. The last thing I want to mention to you is a little big thing that's on my mind, and it has to do with the Statue of Liberty, which is being revealed, what it was put up for, what was the Statue of Liberty, what's the original purpose, what's the original aim, who was it? This great French gift to the United States. That's who gave us the Statue of Liberty, the United States. It was a man named Rebolet, Rene, who was an abolitionist, a French abolitionist, who supported the Union Army. The abolition was an international movement in the Western world. There were French and English abolitionists, people who were opposed to slavery. The people who established the Statue of Liberty, paid the money, had it shipped here, it took 20 years to build it, were people who were inspired by the winning of the Civil War by the North and the freedom of the slaves. It was an affirmation of the freedom of the slave. It was a recognition of the freedom of the slaves. That's what it was put up for. And it started in 1865 after the 13th Amendment was passed and blacks were supposed to be free. At least legally they were. Otherwise they weren't. The French abolitionists, that was their idea. America's first ally in the war against England were the French, and they were always sympathetic to the colonists and the American people because the French were a part of that movement against the monarchy. They had the brilliant idea of a gift to America for its freedom, fighting to free the slaves, that is the Union. And it took 20 years almost to build the Statue of Liberty. It was brought over in pieces. And it was finally completed in 1886. There was a chain that was taken off. It's at the feet of the Lady Liberty. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to breathe free. Send these, the wretched refuse, from your teeming shore. I light my lamp beside the golden door. That was lifted from a poem by one woman that lived in New York, a Jewish woman, named Emma Lazarus. It was a long poem, and they selected that piece, "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled mass." And about 1883 or 4, it just happens so that there was a great immigration movement from Western Europe, or Eastern Europe this time, to America. Originally, the Statue of Liberty had nothing to do with the immigrants from Europe. It had to do with the salute to Lincoln and the freedom of the slaves. All historians know this. What I'm trying to give you an example of how history is manipulated. People see the Statue of Liberty, they think of immigrants of Ellis Island and the immigrants who came over here, but that's not why the Statue of Liberty was established. It was for the freedom of black people and Abraham Lincoln. See, that's how history is. That's why you have people who write history the way power says you should write it. And the American historians helped create that powerful myth about the immigrants and the Statue of Liberty. No, it had to do with the human freedom in the United States of America, according to the people whose idea it was, and these were Frenchmen. It was finally completed in 1886, started in 1865. Almost 20 years, roughly, it took to build the Statue of Liberty. And by the time it was finished, they changed the meaning of it, that it was established for European immigrants. That's not so. That's a myth. In a more brutal sense, you could say it's a lie. Myth has always some reality to it, so a myth is not always an absolute lie. But this is how you manipulate the minds of people in the United States about whiteness and stuff like that. I'll depart with this statement. I think that at this moment, and we are in another period of implosion in America. America is imploding from its own weight. The American people, the vast majority of American people, this is what I think. I'm Mahmoud El-Kati. I'm not black people. I don't know all of the black people. I might know 300 black people up close and personal. So I'm not speaking for black people. This is what I think. Because I transcend race and racism and the nonsense that I belong to. My looks determine my cultural achievement, my individual ability, and so forth is determined by the shape of my nose and so forth. That's utter nonsense. So I'm not talking out of that bag. I don't submit to the doctrine of white supremacy. I oppose it. So, and that's all the racism there is. There is no black racism, yellow racism, not in this country. Indian racism, that's nonsense. People got, it's a creation, a modern creation of the modern people you call Europeans, who weren't Europeans until about 500 years ago. They were just English and French and Brits and Welsh and so forth and Belgians, and that's who they were. The idea of being white is modern, very recent in history, in human history. You won't find white people in history like designated, or Negroes in history, and Indians who don't live in India. That's nonsense. Okay, so what I'm saying is, from what I understand, I may be wrong, but I think at this moment is that the most victimized people in the world of brainwashing are the vast majority of white Americans. They have been brainwashed to believe all of this madness about race and black people don't have this and they're savages and they're this. That's utter nonsense. And we have got to grow up. This is what I'm saying. Lastly, I am not a race, white people, and neither are you. Nonsense. Good day, good night, goodbye. End of discussion.